Hi there, I'm Linda and this is Huttons Valley Permaculture. Well, it's getting towards the end of autumn here, so time to be planting broad beans. In today's video, we're going to prepare the beds, plant the seeds, and then follow it through the growing season to harvest and finally into the kitchen. This is the bed where I grew broad beans last year, and this is where I'm going to grow them again. So as you can see, there's plenty of growth around it. So what we need to do first is clear that out and get this compost spread across the garden bed. This is actually a volunteer tomato that never ripened in time, and the tomatoes look kind of a bit pale and insipid really. Now with these sorrel plants, they're a bit like a dock plant. They're in that family and they've got a really big deep taproot and they're pretty hard to clear out. If you don't want sorrel somewhere, clear them, any seedlings, when you first see them, and you can get on top of them, because once they're in the ground, they're kind of in the ground. You can see the root there, quite pretty colours, but serious root system on these. Now I'm not sure whether that will grow again, so I'm not going to put it in my compost path, but dispose of it properly. But if there's just leafy greens, I don't mind them going in the path. With the bed all clear of the weeds and all the sorrel, I can now spread out this compost. Now it's plenty of compost for this size garden, so I don't need to be adding any from my compost bay, which is why that compost path is so brilliant. It just came from here to here, and you've got plenty of organic material to get your next crop of plants growing. With the compost all spread out now, we're ready to plant our broad beans. Now broad beans need about 6 hours of full sun, so in this position here in winter, it does get the full sun. By planting at the end of autumn, you will get a harvest of broad beans sort of early spring. Now to get going with the planting, they need to be in rows of about 1 metre. Last year I planted really too close, and while I got plenty of broad beans, I could have probably got more. So this year I'm just going to do 2 rows. I've got my beans here. I'm not sure how many there are. They were gifted to me by Ruby down in Tasmania, and they grew beautiful broad beans last year. Now the seed itself doesn't need any soaking or stratification, which is putting it into cool temperatures, but should germinate just by direct sowing in the ground. So I'm just going to spread them out first, and I can't help myself but use up the remaining 4 just through the middle. Alright, I think that will be fine. And the seeds just need to be planted about 50 mil in, so a couple of inches, 5 centimetres. Well, that's the broad beans in the ground now. It's going to rain tomorrow, so I'm not going to bother to water those in, but the next we'll see of them is when they're germinating and are starting to come out of the ground. Back with the broad beans today. We've got some plants emerging, but as you can see, we've got bird activity digging in there, and in some cases totally destroying the young plant, which is a bit unfortunate. Although maybe we've got to watch out for slugs and snails too. Mostly bird activity that I've seen around lately, but yeah. At this stage you've got to be pretty careful with the emerging plants and protect them. See, the birds have really dug into that one. So what I will be doing today is covering these plants over to make sure that the birds can't dig them up further. That will hopefully keep the birds out, and I'll just have to keep an eye out on it for snails and slugs. It's 25th of June, just checking in on my broad beans. there's some plants getting bigger. There's some that are just kind of got out of the ground and they're looking a bit weird actually, some of them. But some of them are getting going nicely. This one's just happening. That one's getting up there. So they kind of vary at the time that they germinate and start to grow, but they're starting to get going. I'm going to leave this mesh on a little bit longer because it seems to be doing the trick. That one was certainly killed off, but we've still got another one in its place coming up. Perhaps it was just one of the side leaves that we lost. It should look more like this one by now, but give it a few more weeks, it'll be getting there. It's a few days after I've removed the netting from my broad beans and just checking on them. The birds have left them alone, and with the sunny conditions we've had of late, they are starting to grow. We did have some frost this morning, but the frost doesn't seem to affect them at all. So these plants are growing pretty well. And I think we can probably add the first layer of our mesh, which is the support for these plants. I used this mesh last season and it did a really good job of just keeping these plants upright. And I'm just reusing the same mesh again for this year. I'm just going to have it quite low, and you can move it up as you need to. Actually, I might just adjust it a little bit, down a bit further here, being careful not to knock these little plants out. And I'm just going to stretch it so it's a bit firmer across the whole bed. And as these plants grow, I'll just be able to train them up through the gaps, and that gives them plenty of support as they get big and they can better tolerate winds. So 1 week into July and I'm happy to report our broad beans are going well. The second row of mesh went on probably a couple of weeks ago now, so we've had some growth and the plants are standing up to the winds we've been having lately really well. And we've got lots of beautiful flowers coming on them. I didn't quite contain all of the sort of shoots off these plants, so there's quite a lot hanging out, but there's enough of the individual plant held by the wire to keep the rest of the plant upright. It is mid-October and these are my beautiful broad beans. They've shot up, there's flowers everywhere, and bees and little hoverflies are enjoying them. The mesh has held these plants up nicely. We've had some really strong winds of late, and while there are some sort of on the outer of the structure, they've sort of been protected by those not falling over with these strong winds. Now we are starting to see some little beans starting to grow, and you can certainly just pick those ones off and eat them like that. But what I like to do is mostly leave them to grow nice and big, and then I double pod them and pop them in the freezer. It's the end of November here and we're back with the broad beans because it's time to harvest. The beans have got really big and heavy and some of the plants are falling over that weren't contained in my amazing trellis system. But most of them were held upright and the beans are looking great, and it's time to get the large ones harvested. Well, that's all I'm going to harvest at the moment. But what I will do is leave some of these beans to grow a bit bigger and they will be great for seeds for next season. And some of these other beans I'll just leave for a bit longer to see if we can get them a little bit larger. So with these harvested now, all you've got to do is double pod them. So you get these beautiful little beans out and then you've got to remove the skin that's on top of these. So I generally boil those for a couple of minutes and then the seed inside pops out really easily. And what I do with those is just put them into silicone squares and I'll freeze those, and they're easy to grab out, add to a salad or have as a side dish, and they're really delicious and worth all the effort. Now, what I really wanted the video to show was how amazing these trellis structures are for holding up these beans. I used to hate growing broad beans with the string method because I found the string just didn't really hold them in place, especially with the strong winds that I get here. But I found these, once you've got them up, you can adjust them up or down or add in extra layers, and they make growing broad beans really easy. I hope you've enjoyed today's video. Give broad bean growing a go. I'll see you next time.